In today's video, we're looking back at the 2018 NHL Draft, and we're going to redraft the top 10 selections. With those original picks still being the top 10, some have fallen, and certainly players that were drafted much later have proven to be the much better prospects and picks. We'll discuss this redraft coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today's video is going to be a 2018 redraft of the top 10 NHL prospects from that year's draft class. Now, of course, this was the draft class that's seen some pretty good players at the top. There were certainly some, questionable picks along the way. For the most part, the draft went sort of the way a lot of people thought, but there's always a few swerves in those first 5-6 picks, which tend to kind of throw everything off. So before we do a redraft, though, I want to take a look back at how the original picks went, and then we're going to take a look at who I feel would now be the top 10. We're also going to discuss some of the players that I feel, obviously based on where I'd re-rank these guys, would be some of the biggest risers in the draft and some of the biggest drops from that time. So let's first start, like I said, with looking back at the original draft. Of course, the Buffalo Sabres had the first overall pick and selected defenseman Rasmus Dahlin. Dahlin's proven to be a quality defenseman, one of the top in the game. Took a little bit longer, I think, to kind of reach his potential than some might have thought. Certainly Dahlin was kind of hailed as being a generational type defenseman. Maybe not an overall generational player, but one of the best defensemen of his generation. And for a little while there, it was kind of questionable, but now I think he's reached, I'm not sure if he's reached his peak yet, but he's certainly the best defenseman on the Sabres and arguably one of the top in the league. And I'm not sure how much higher his ceiling is going to be, but certainly looks like he's going to be a great selection. At number 2, we had Carolina selecting Andrei Svechnikov. At number 3 was the more questionable pick of this group, Montreal taking a center because they had such poor depth at this position, and Marc Bergevin selecting Jerperi, Kotkaniemi. I know a lot of Habs fans. I still remember the lady in the audience wearing a Habs jersey, grabbing her face in disgust and with the big eyes popping out, because they certainly were hoping they would take a player like Brady, Tkachuk, or even Zadina at that time was kind of considered a higher ranked prospect too, but Kotkaniemi ended up being the guy, and he didn't stay in Montreal too long. The number 4 pick was the Ottawa Senators, who then selected Brady, Tkachuk. Like I said, for Habs fans, I think long term, I would think most of them at this point would say that they wish that Bergevin had selected Brady, not Jerperi, Kotkaniemi. But hey, it's fun to look back, and it's easy to make the selections in retrospect here. The Coyotes picked number 5, and they took Barrett Hayton. Detroit picked number 6 and took Filip Zadina. Both of those guys have not lived up to the hype of those levels of picks. I still think they both have a future in the NHL, and they both can be decent players, I think, but they were probably drafted a little bit high overall. And I think that's the problem with some guys. They get drafted too high, or they get get paid too much money based on a short, small sample, and then they become an unpopular player because of the expectations are not realistic, and that's half the battle sometimes. Vancouver picked number 7, took Quinn Hughes. So at this point, looking at the teams passing over Hughes, I think Vancouver did the right thing here, made a good pick, and I think at the same time, other teams might regret not picking him. Number 8 was Chicago, and they took Adam Boqvist, another defenseman. The Rangers kind of went off the board a little bit here and took Vitaly Kravtsov at number 9. And number 10 was the Edmonton Oilers selecting defenseman Evan Bouchard. So Bouchard's certainly a player who has worked out nicely for Edmonton. I think would be one of the higher ranked defensemen now in this draft. Certainly, interesting to look back. I think there's probably at least 3 to 4 of these players that, if we were redoing this for real, would not be top 10 selections anymore. So let's now take a look at where I would re-rank the top 10. So not all of these players have made my top 10. There are some players that were outside of that who have made it into the top 10 of the first round. A few of these guys were also first round picks, but later, and there's even one that was a much later pick that's jumped up that substantially. So now let's look back and see how things would have worked out if things went the way I think they should have. Of course, like I said, it's easy to look back in retrospect here, but it's fun to do. Number 1, the Buffalo Sabres would still select Rasmus Dahlin. I still think he's the top player overall in this draft. He's a stud defenseman. who has the chance to be one of the, like I said, I still think the term that he was given was being a generational type D still applies, and I think they made the right move here. They were able to really get that cornerstone on the blue line for many years to come. Like he's already, like I said, now we're 5 years later, but he's one of the top defensemen in the game, and still not hitting his peak just yet. I'm sure he'll win at least a Norris Trophy or two before it's all said and done. But Dahlin to me is still the number one overall selection here. Now, the Carolina Hurricanes picked number 2 overall. They originally took Andrei Svechnikov. Now I'm going to say they should take Brady Tkachuk. And I'm sure this might be controversial to some. There might be a debate over this. But here is my rationale. If you take a look at Brady Tkachuk and Andrei Svechnikov, I think they're very comparable players if you look across a number of metrics. For example, looking at their careers so far, because both players made the NHL right away. Brady Tkachuk's played in 359 games. Svechnikov's played in 347 games, so pretty close to even sample size. Brady Tkachuk scored 125 goals. Svechnikov scored 112. So Brady's got an edge in goals. He does have a slight edge in games played too, mind you, but you break it down per game, it's still a slight edge. Assist-wise, Brady has 150. Svechnikov has 152. So pretty close either way there. 275 points overall for Brady, 264 points for Svechnikov. So obviously Brady also has a big edge in penalty minutes because he plays with an edge, actually fights a lot more, and certainly just plays a different style of game. Brady's also become the captain of the Ottawa Senators. He's also bigger. I mean, if you're looking at, it's hard to predict how big some of these guys are going to get, but Svechnikov's 6'2", Brady's 6'4", Brady's also a little bit heavier as well. So, he's got a size advantage, and he's also got just some intangibles that are difficult to measure. Like I said, with the leadership and the physical play and the fighting, and, he's just a guy who can take his team and drag them into the fight, which you can say the same about his brother as well. And, he's been a great young captain so far, and Svechnikov to me is a great player. But to me, if I had to pick and knew all this ahead of time back in 2018, I would have taken Brady at number 2 over Svech. So that's my opinion on that one. So I put Brady Tkachuk number 2 to Carolina, which would certainly be, wow, would everything be different in the NHL if that's where he ended up? Montreal Canadiens selecting number 3 would not select Jerperi Kotkaniemi anymore. I would now have them selecting Andrei Svechnikov. This draft was being redone. Svech would be the number 3 pick now since I moved Brady up a spot to number 2. Obviously, Svechnikov would be a tremendous asset for the Habs. Certainly a guy who so far in his young career has been a pretty consistent 25-30 goal guy, and I think there's more in there. I'm sure at some point Svechnikov is going to have a 50-goal season. I think he'll even have a few 40-goal seasons. I think the potential is there. Unfortunately, he did have a fairly serious injury to finish out the last campaign here, but overall Svechnikov's got size, he's got skill, very talented, good proven goal scorer, who's also, I think, a little bit of an underrated playmaker. Look at the number of assists he's racked up. It's not a coincidence that he has as many as he has. Same goes for Brady Tkachuk. They both were kind of, more goal scorer type, physical wingers, but they're both actually underrated playmakers in my opinion as well. So Montreal would then get Svechnikov. Number 4 would have the Ottawa Senators. Unfortunately, they can't get Brady anymore because he's gone higher, so they would take Quinn Hughes, who would jump up 3 spots and be the second top defenseman here in this draft. Quinn Hughes has proven to be a dynamic player in Vancouver, very gifted offensively. Still working on his defensive game. Not overly huge, but certainly a guy who's, really a terrific skater. The exits and entries are a skill of his. Great passer, good power play quarterback. Like, he's got a lot of skills there to like. And if Ottawa's not able to get Brady, then to me, he's the next best thing available with where they're picking here in the draft. Number 5, the Arizona Coyotes. To me, Barrett Hayton, I always liked this player. I was fond of watching him in junior and Team Canada and all that. Has some good leadership skills. But to me, he was drafted too high. He should have been a much later pick. Still think he's a first rounder, but a late, mid to late first rounder, not as high as this. I think At the time, GM John Chayka went off the board here. So to me, it should have been defenseman Andrei Miller. Andrei Miller, to me, would be the third top defenseman, I think, in this draft. Moving up 17 spots, of course, originally taken down at number 22 by the New York Rangers. Miller's proven to be a real steady guy. I mean, you could argue between Miller and Evan Bouchard here. I think there's a good argument to be taken. I like Bouchard's game as well as an offensive guy. I just think Miller's a little bit more well-rounded. And depending on what the need is, I think there's an argument that maybe Miller goes before Bouchard. But if you want a power play quarterback, and that's more what you need, you go Bouchard. So ultimately, I think you could probably flip these guys, and it wouldn't be, a big debate either way. So to me, Miller should have went number 5. Number 6, the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously would not take Zadina. I have them now taking Evan Bouchard, who moves up 4 spots. Another, like I said, offensively gifted defenseman, obviously playing for the Oilers, having great success. They moved Tyson Barrie to allow him a bigger role. Terrific on the power play. Has a great shot, which they call the Boosh Bomb. He's done a terrific job back there, and really I think would go up even higher than what he was originally drafted for if this was to be redone. Number 7, you get the Vancouver Canucks. Now, of course, they had Quinn Hughes originally. He's not available anymore, but they have a decent alternative, and that's Noah Dobson of the New York Islanders, who was originally drafted number 12. Dobson moves up 5 spots here. Already had a 50-point season under his belt. Still had a little bit of a setback last year. I think he can still take some big steps forward. He's got good size. He's like 6'3", rangy guy, good skater, good puck mover, good offensive skills. Won multiple, junior championships in junior before taking the jump to pro hockey. Memorial Cup champion. Played quite a role and was by far the best player on his team when Acadie Mathers went and won the Memorial Cup. Still has a lot of pedigree, and I really like this guy. And he still, like I said, he had a breakout, but then a bit of a setback, and I think it's going to be imperative for the Islanders for him to kind of get that game and form back and kind of take some big steps forward, hopefully this year. So he would now be number 7. And number 8, originally Adam Boqvist. Boqvist is going to fall down my list here a bit, and I have them taking winger Joel Farabee, who originally went at number 14 to the Philadelphia Flyers. I think Farabee is going to prove to be a pretty good scoring winger here for Philly, or if they end up moving him, hard to say. I know they're going through a rebuild right now, so a lot of these guys are not sure of their futures with the club and who's going to be a part of the solution, who's going to move on. There's been some debate that Farabee likely stays, and I've heard some speculation that maybe he goes. Right now, I think the odds are for him to stay, and we'll see, but I think he has a solid potential to be. I think as he grows, he could be a consistent 30-goal scorer and be a real good player, top 6 for Philly moving forward. And right now, he would definitely move up. At number 9, it would be the New York Rangers, and I'd have them selecting, instead of Vitaly Kravtsov, Rasmus Sandin, another defenseman. Obviously, this is going to be a defense-heavy redraft here. Sandin was originally drafted 29th by the Maple Leafs, now with the Washington Capitals after being traded. Sandin is a pretty good offensive defenseman as well, coming out of Sault Ste. Marie in the OHL. Had a solid junior run. Been in and out of the Leafs lineup before he finally got a chance to go to Washington. Had a really hot start there. At some point, maybe he has a chance to prove that he's more, closer to being an equal to some of these guys. But at this point, I think he's not as advanced as guys like Dobson, Bouchard, Miller, Hughes. Will he ever catch up to them? It's difficult to say, but he's still a pretty solid top 4 defenseman prospect. I still think of him as kind of being a prospect in a sense as a top 4 guy, because he just hasn't done it for a super long period of time. But in his brief experience in Washington, he had a real good run, and I think he's going to get a big role there, and we'll get a chance to run with it and start racking up the points. Eventually, he'll take over from John Carlson as being the main offensive gun from the back end. And at number 10, the Edmonton Oilers, who of course originally took Bouchard, who now moved up in this draft. I'd have them selecting Yegor Sharangovich, who originally went 141st overall to the Devils. Now has been traded, of course, over to Calgary. So certainly going to be part of that Battle of Alberta with the Oilers. But ultimately, he's a guy who was kind of flew under the radar and has really developed and expanded his game, I think, a lot faster than many expected, obviously, being taken that late. But Sharangovich was a very much a Hail Mary pick way, way, way deep in the draft, and it's worked out nicely for the Devils. And then, of course, they're able to move him on in the trade there. So if you take a look at, to me right now, Sharangovich is probably my biggest riser in the draft. Some other guys that would certainly move up, which I didn't place them exactly where they'd be, but they would move up substantially, would include another Devils pick, Akira Schmid, a goaltender. That's a couple of late picks there by the Devils that worked out well. He was taken 136 overall. Philip Kurashev in Chicago was 120. Pontus Holmberg as well in Toronto, 156. They're still kind of finding their way in the NHL, so hard to say exactly where we'll end up, but certainly guys that'll move up as time goes on for sure. As far as some of the players that would be the biggest drops, well, you'd obviously get Kotkaniemi falling a fair bit. I don't know exactly where I'd place him. I'd still have him in the first round, but definitely outside of the top 10. I would dare say I'd probably have him 11, 12 range. Hard to say exactly. Denisenko, who was the Panthers pick. Grigory Denisenko definitely would fall. Vitaly Kravtsov, like I said, I went number 9, would definitely fall. Definitely much, much later in the first round. Hard to say exactly where. Philip Zadina would not be number 6 overall. He'd be a late first rounder as well. Ryan Merkley, who was the skilled defenseman with bad attitude, and it certainly came with some baggage, and had a chance to play in San Jose with the Sharks organization for a while, and then got traded, and he's already a UFA. Hard to say where he would end up, but he would definitely be much later because of some concerns that have proven to be somewhat, justified here in him not making it so far. I don't know if all of his issues in the pro level are all necessarily attitude or things that are related to that, but certainly didn't go any ways to helping him that much, we can say for sure. So that is your new top 10 for the 2018 NHL Draft. Obviously, again, Dahlin, Tkachuk, Svechnikov, Hughes, Miller, Bouchard, Dobson, Farabee, Sandin, Sharangovich, which would be my new top 10. So I'd love to know what you guys all think as well. Leave some comments below with who you feel you'd put in this new top 10 if you had an opportunity to redraft this draft class. Certainly lots of talent, but certainly some questionable picks in there as well, which, like I said, you get that pretty much every draft. Just a matter of which team hits with their picks and which ones don't make the right call. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and lots of other videos just like this one as well, around lots of other draft and other prospect talk from around the entire league. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.